What if a novel sounded like a saxophone solo? What if its sentences riffed and echoed and looped, never quite the same twice, like jazz itself? Toni Morrison's Jazz, published in 1992, is exactly that kind of novel. It's a performance in prose, a story built around repetition, improvisation, and emotional dissonance. Set mainly in Harlem during the 1920s, Jazz follows a fractured love triangle that unravels into something much deeper, a meditation on Black history, inherited trauma, and the complex rhythms of love and memory. Morrison designed the structure of the novel to parallel and launch the process of invention, improvisation, and change inherent in jazz. She compared the writing process to a jazz performance, where musicians respond quickly to changes initiated by one player. This improvisatory approach means the narrator doesn't know exactly where the story is going, creating an element of unpredictability. The structure is intended to equal meaning, manifesting the intellect, sensuality, anarchy, and modernity of the music. At the heart of the novel is an African-American woman named Violet Trace, a local hairdresser, her husband Joe Trace, a middle-aged door-to-door salesman, and Joe's lover, an 18-year-old Dorcas. The novel starts by telling you about Violet, who violently attacked Dorcas's dead body at her own funeral. It's revealed that after 20 years of marriage, Joe falls into an affair with Dorcas. The affair ends in tragedy when Joe, overcome with jealousy, shoots Dorcas at a party when he sees her dancing with another guy. Dorcas bleeds to death, refusing to call for help. At the funeral, Violet loses control and tries to slash Dorcas's face with a knife. The chapter carries on to tell you on how both Joe and Violet are haunted by the memory of Darkass, how they visit a picture that Violet had hung up. But that's just the opening. From there, the story unfolds backward and sideways into the lives of these characters and their pasts through slavery, the Great Migration, and the streets of Harlem. The narrative moves like jazz, fragmented, looping, unpredictable. The characters are haunted by history, and the city itself pulses like a living thing. Let's begin with Joe Trace. He's charismatic, hardworking, but emotionally hollow. Joe sells beauty products and reinvents himself as he goes, much like a trumpet player riffing on a melody. When he meets Dorcas, he thinks he's found new purpose and passion, but instead he spirals into obsession. His act of violence, shooting Dorcas, is a tragic attempt to control love, to capture something already gone. Joe is also a man carrying deep wounds, abandoned by his mother, raised without a strong sense of identity, shaped by loss and longing. His violence is not just jealousy, it's the eruption of buried trauma. Joe's wife, Violet Trace, is equally complex. After Dorcas's death, Violet becomes known in Harlem as Violent Violet. She shows up at the funeral with a knife, tries to attack the girl's corpse, and begins talking to birds. But Violet is more than just unhinged. Her madness is a response to betrayal, yes, but also to grief, to silence, to a lifetime of suppressed pain. Raised by her grandmother after her mother was institutionalized, Violet has never felt secure. In the city, she becomes lost, emotionally, spiritually. She wanders, she listens to records, she talks to Dorcas's ghost. But slowly, through memory and friendship, she begins to heal. And then there's Dorcas. Only 18, she seems carefree, independent, modern, a child of the Harlem Renaissance. But she's also scarred by trauma. Her parents were killed in race riots, and she's raised by her strict, religious aunt. In Joe, she finds excitement, but she quickly grows bored and starts seeing someone her own age. When Joe kills her, she chooses not to cry out for help. Dorcas becomes the ghost of the novel. Her silence echoes in Joe's guilt and Violet's grief. She is the note that lingers long after the music stops. Surrounding this trio are other voices and memories. Alice Manfred, Dorcas's aunt, is a figure of restraint. She's grieving her own history of loss and wants to protect Dorcas from the world, but fails. Felice, Dorcas's friend, enters the story later and becomes a quiet catalyst. She represents a younger generation, grounded and clear-eyed. And then there's the past, woven through stories of True Belle, Violet's grandmother, and Golden Gray, a biracial man from the 19th century. Golden Gray's story, full of shame, pride, and hidden parentage, reminds us that nothing in jazz is isolated. Everything echoes. The past isn't gone. It's a bass line under every sentence. Jazz emerged from a blend of African and European influences, rooted in African American musical forms such as the spiritual, blues, and ragtime. In Africa, music was often tied to ritual and social function. This cultural context shapes jazz not just as sound, but as a method of communicating history and survival. Parallels. African oral storytelling. These techniques reflect a legacy of African history. Morrison echoes these elements in the structure and narration of jazz. And who tells this story? That's one of the most intriguing parts. The narrator in jazz is elusive, unreliable, maybe even a character themselves. They interrupt, they confess when they get things wrong, they change their mind. This is Morrison's way of performing jazz through narration. The voice improvises, tries to find harmony in the chaos, and makes music out of memory. The narrator embodies the spontaneity of a solo performer, where although their stories are distinctly their own experience, they still that can be globally experienced. The narrator initially claims to understand the love triangle that leads to Dorcas's murder, but later admits uncertainty. I thought I knew them. I was so sure it was love. This self-correction creates a narrative that resists closure and embraces emotional improvisation. The themes of jazz run deep. Memory is central. How it bends, loops, gets distorted. Your history, because Black history in America has never been clean or clear. Trauma is inherited, misunderstood, and reshaped across generations. The novel suggests that storytelling, like music, can be a way to cope, to reimagine, and to resist silence. Morrison uses specific rhythmic and structural techniques, such as call and response, adapted from both blues and jazz traditions. This technique is used structurally within the narrative. Often, a chapter will end with an idea or phrase, and the subsequent chapter will begin with a response that improvises upon what came before. Examples include the shift from the parrot saying, "I love you" at the end of one chapter to the next beginning with or used to repetition and variation, related to call and response and crucial for improvisation in Black cultural traditions. The novel uses repetition of themes, scenes, and ideas. The narrator revisits and plays out stories using repetition and revision. Examples of this are seen when Morrison reflects back on historical characters, showing the repeated cycle of trauma. Musical language. The language itself often reflects a jazz musicality, particularly when describing city life or characters' actions and thoughts. Ordinary descriptions are infused with musical terms like triplets, duets, quartets, or scatty look. A character's actions, like Violet's, are described using musical terms such as murmuring, stream, breaks, and chord, presenting them as analogous to jazz techniques. Breaks and rests. The blank pages inserted between chapters function like pauses or breaks in a jazz performance. These narrative rests invite the reader to reflect and anticipate, Much like musical rests allow listeners to consider a soloist's phrase and anticipate the next figure. Jazz is both homage and innovation. By embedding jazz's rhythmic and communal techniques into her novel, Morrison reflects the music's origins while reshaping the traditional literary form. Jazz in Morrison's hands is not background music, but it becomes the novel's structural soul, an expressive force through which history, grief, and love are felt, reimagined, and reclaimed, echoing the soul of jazz itself. So, what does jazz sound like to you? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. If you want more videos that unpack powerful poetic literature, hit like, hit subscribe, and stay tuned. We're just getting started.